Today is the day of Pentecost, which is the day that the Holy Spirit came upon the first disciples. We read about it in Acts chapter 2. And the coming of the Spirit allowed them to speak about Jesus in multiple languages that day, so many could understand the gospel, the news of Jesus. And so today we celebrate God the Spirit, who is our counselor and our encourager or comforter. And today, maybe we should ask him to especially lead us into all truth. It's one of the things Jesus said to his disciples the Spirit would do. Maybe lead us into all truth. As we look at this passage, we're going to ask him to convict us of sin, of righteousness, of judgment, and to allow his word to perform, I guess, some soul surgery on each of us and show us what God wants us to hear from these verses. So please pray with me one more time as we commit ourselves to God. Father, thank you for your word to us. And thank you that you give us your Spirit to help us not only understand, but take to heart what you have said. So today in these verses that are, I guess, quite blunt, help us to see what Jesus would want from us. Help me to speak clearly and well, and would you help all of us to hear what it is you need us to hear. Amen. Outcomes don't always meet expectations, do they? Sometimes it's due to poor execution, but often it's because our expectations were simply unrealistic. I mean, it must have happened to you before. It happens to most of us. It doesn't just apply to the projects we do. It applies to everything. When I do premarital counseling with young couples, my first question to them is, why? No. My first question to them is, what are your expectations? Both of marriage and of each other. Because often our expectations in marriage are shaped by things that aren't actually realistic. It's the same often with our expectations of parenting or of the career we think we want to do, or even our expectations if we think, right, we're going to move city or move country and this is what's going to happen to us. Expectations don't meet reality. In our passage, Jesus very kindly helps anyone who wants to follow him set their expectations straight. He's got two interactions. You read that. In the first one, with the teacher of the law, he tells us what to expect from being a follower. And in the second one, with the other disciple, he actually tells us what he expects from us as disciples. So it's all about expectations today. Our expectations and his expectations. So let's have a look. In verse 18, before the first man approaches, we see that Jesus already had a huge following. Large crowds. He drew crowds because of the things that he was doing and saying. Yet, notice Jesus wouldn't make a good social media influencer today. He's not interested in crowds. In fact, he wants to leave. It's not because he's an introvert. It's not because he's being contrary. It's because, and we see this often throughout the Gospels, Jesus doesn't want people to follow him for the wrong reasons. So he helps the first man, who's very quick to promise, to understand the cost. That's our first point. And have a look at verse 19. A scribe approached him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Scribes, or teachers of the law in some versions, were part of the religious establishment, and they often portrayed as opponents to Jesus. I don't think it's the case here today. This guy does sound like an earnest inquirer. He sounds excited about Jesus. He's just misunderstood some very key factors which Jesus is going to correct for him. So the scribe, a teacher of the law, he would have been part of as I said, the Jewish establishment. He would have known the Old Testament. And the Jews of Jesus' day expected a Messiah, which is God's promised king. They expected him, but they expected one who would be quite political. The expectations were that the Messiah would come, he would drive out the Romans, who were the occupying force of the day, and he would reestablish the kingdom of Israel. And so if the scribe is coming to Jesus and saying, "I'll follow you wherever you go," it might be that he's going, "I'm sure this is the Messiah, and following him is going to be a political or social or prestigious thing to be doing. This is the right side to be on. And so Jesus has to set his expectations because he doesn't want anyone to enthusiastically kick off the Christian life without knowing what we're signing up for. Have a look at verse 20. Foxes have dens, birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Very short, discipleship is not going to be easy. In fact, it will mean that you sacrifice comforts in this life. That's what Jesus is saying. It's a surprising thing. This is where we're in Matthew, Jesus calls himself Son of Man for the first time. It's quite telling, I think, in this context, because the title comes from the book of Daniel, and some of you will have heard this often before, but it speaks of a person to whom God gives all authority to rule, to judge the entire universe. So the Son of Man is someone who is king. Everything belongs to him. He has the right to everything. And so Jesus is saying this one who has the right to all things, he has the right to a palace and a king-size bed with the perfect mattress and the most comfortable pillows. He's giving that up. And he's saying, I didn't come for that. I didn't come for a life of power and prestige and comfort. And so we have to ask ourselves, why would we expect that if we followed him? Now, sure, we are not a church that teaches the prosperity gospel, I hope. But I wonder how many of us do think that following Jesus should make our lives here on earth a little better. Right? I think that's sort of ingrained in the human mindset, because that's what gods in any culture have always been for. So it's like a tit-for-tat relationship. So in the old days, I would have, been some farmer, and I'd worship a, a fertility god. And I'd worship him so that my crops would be good. And if my crops weren't good, I'd either think, I've not worshipped him well enough, or he's actually not as good a God as I thought he was. Let me go find another one who's going to make my crops grow. And we've got to think, how do we know we're not still doing that kind of following, that kind of worship with Jesus? That it's a tit for tat. A key sign, maybe a key help for you, is that when something goes wrong in life, we either feel that we've done something bad and God is punishing us, or we think that Jesus has let us down. That somehow a disappointment, whether it's a failure in a relationship, whether it's not getting the job you want, even if it is a serious illness, that those things were out of the question because we were Christians. Or perhaps you're bitter with God because the life you have is not the one that you thought he would give you for following him. The American pastor Tim Keller used to say that if our faith crumbled when things didn't go our way, then the God we had believed in was not the God of the Bible, but a God of convenience. So Jesus wants this man, he wants us, to understand what we're signing up for. It's not necessarily for a life that looks like whatever our culture's view of success or prestige or comfort looks like. Not only might you not get any of those if you followed him, you might have to give them up. And so today, if you are considering Christianity, this might seem like a terrible pitch we're giving here, but Jesus wants us to be realistic. He doesn't want you to think about him as a genie in a bottle, responding to your wishes. He's much more than that. And we'll continue to explore that in the talk. But he wants you to be aware that there will be sacrifices we will make for following him. If you're here today and you are calling yourself a Christian, this is one of the few times I'm going to ask you to take a moment. So maybe you want to write things down, maybe you want to think about these things carefully, to take a moment to think very carefully about what your Christianity is. Is it a transactional thing where you give to Jesus so that you can receive from him the things you are actually interested in. The things that like jobs or relationship or wealth or comfort, that the things that you actually want. I think then we need to heed the warning, because then we are using him. We're not following him. Which is what the second interaction shows us he expects from us. So, second point is he expects wholehearted devotion. Verses 21 to 22. Lord, another of his disciples said, first let me go bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. I bet you when you heard those verses the first time, you were like, easy there, Jesus. That sounds pretty hard. Can you tone it down a little bit? Because it seems like this guy has a perfectly reasonable request. It's like culturally even in our culture, we still honor our father and mother. If they die, we go bury them. Jesus must have a pretty good reason for denying it so harshly. I think that if we looked at two Old Testament passages, it will help us to see what Jesus was getting at. There are two here. One is from the book of Numbers and one is from the book of Leviticus. They are both instructions for two groups of people. The one in Numbers was a group of people called the Nazarites. And the Nazarites were devoted to God from birth. If you know the story of Samson, Samson was a Nazarite. And one of the things that the Nazarites were not allowed to do was to go near a dead body. During the time he consecrates himself to the Lord, he's not to defile himself for his father or mother, or his brother or sister. The same with the second group, which were the priests, which were also part of a tribe and a clan. They were set aside their whole life in service of God in the temple. They could not make themselves unclean, even for his father and mother. This was a sign of the fact that they were fully devoted to the service of God, and that these things were a sacrifice that they were willing to make, or they would make, because of their devotion to the Lord. So what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, I expect the same level of devotion to me as God expects. Nothing and no one should come before me. So he's not saying Christians may not go and attend the funerals of their family and go, nothing like that, obviously. He's saying, I must come before everything. Now, quick aside, people sometimes say Jesus never outright calls himself God in the Gospels. This is a place where he is effectively saying it. He's saying the devotion due to God is due to me. But that doesn't make his response any easier, does it? I mean, he's still calling for total devotion. And so, as you think about discipleship, you want to be careful. We want to be careful of conditional or shared allegiance. So we want to be careful, actually, of the form of Christianity that says, don't get too carried away with this religion thing. Don't be too radical. Tone it down. This is the counter to that. And I want to say, as we get into the second point, I find this one of the most difficult, not passages. I understand intellectually that Jesus is God and he deserves my full devotion. It's the practicality of it that I find difficult. And so, and I think is a particular danger for me, and I think is a particular danger for us. So I am preaching now to my heart as much as I am to yours as we consider these words of Jesus, especially because we do have this kind of conditional thinking in a lot of other areas of life. You know, first I will get my career and my finances in order, and then we can get married. And that might mean that we date for 10 years, and in the end we kind of just live together because it's easier. But first we'll do this. This is more important right now. Or first we'll sort out life before we think about having kids. Or first I will, build my career and my life before I settle down into a community and find my roots. We do those kind of things all the time. First, I'll have this Krispy Kreme donut before I go on a diet. Yeah, just lighten the mood a little bit. We do that too. And I think as we do this more often, it becomes easier to do it with Jesus. And what we prioritize shows us where our allegiance really lies. So use the following examples, not to guilt you, but to help you examine. These are some examples, help you examine where your danger for allying yourself to something or someone else might be. I had to laugh that the passage today should come up on the Day of Comrades. And many of us who would be here are running or supporting comrades. But I've done comrades. And I know what it did to me. I know what comrades did to me. And maybe it doesn't do it to everyone. Maybe it doesn't do it to you. But for me, it's a good example of something that demanded my allegiance. It took all of me, which they even said in 2017. Zinikele, it takes all of you. What happens is you avoid people so you don't get sick and so you can get enough sleep. Your diet, your week, your family's holidays, they're all shaped around this race, this one day. And part of what suffers, it has to suffer because everything else suffers. Part of what suffers is your engagement with Jesus and his people. And you'll find you bail on growth group because, if you go to bed after 9 and you have to be up at 4, you miss church on Sundays more often because you've got races you want to run because you want to qualify and train. Now, being a church or in a group isn't everything Christianity is about. But what you are doing is you're willingly, by choice, putting yourself outside of Jesus' community more often than not. And that is where a lot of discipleship happens. That's a lot of where your discipleship is happening. And you remove yourself. Sport does this. As much as sport is wonderful, whether it is comrades, whether it's cycling or paddling or rugby or cricket or ultimate frisbee, it can take up all your time, all your energy, all your focus. And it becomes the thing that drives you. And I'm not saying that these are things get in the way of church stuff. And that's what I'm speaking about, because sometimes we can even make church stuff an idol. Let me first prove myself in how much I do at church, and then I can follow Jesus with a clear conscience. We put the cart before the horse. Now look, for some of us, a lack of involvement in our church or in general kingdom serving might indicate that we are putting off following Jesus. And maybe that is you. But on the other extreme, you could be doing all this church stuff, not to follow Jesus, but to prove yourself, either to yourself or to this group of people. Think about where you might be. It's not just exercise or sport where we prioritize things over Jesus. We do it with our careers. We put our spiritual lives on hold as we do internships or specialize or climb the corporate ladder. Success and reaching a certain point becomes what we aim for and we shape our lives around. And our prayers show this as well. For parents, one way to see whether this is a struggle for you is to have a look at what you aspire to for your children. For your children. What is most important for them? How much does school, whether it's school work or school sport or other activities, take up of their lives? And what are we telling our children is most important in life? Who are we telling them is most important? And I know we are terrified of our children ending up hating church or walking away from Jesus because we forced them, forced them into stuff. I am too. But the opposite of forcing is not, putting your foot totally off the brake and just letting go. The opposite of forcing is discipleship, right? It's pointing our kids to how wonderful Jesus is and how he is better than anything else life has to offer and how he's best for us. And I'm still struggling with how to do that as well. I'm struggling how to do that with my kids because I struggle how to do it with myself at times, which I guess is all of us. But that's why we want to preach to ourselves, want to have other people around us to help disciple us, both for our own good and our children's good. Now, the fact that sport or studies or work or the pursuit of relationships or good matric marks takes up a lot of time doesn't mean that they are bad things. So I've given all these examples, right? It doesn't mean they're bad things. Don't hear me say that. I'm just as excited as everyone else today about Comrades. I've got the app, got the 25 people I'm following. Who knows, maybe one day I want to do it again, but I want to be careful. I want to be careful that it doesn't become this all-encompassing, taking all of you, of my resources in life. It just means that we have to consider whether they're competing for our allegiance, or even whether they themselves are pointers to the fact that who I'm actually allied to is myself. I am my own God, and I want to do things for myself rather than the fact that I'm following Jesus. That is what he's calling us to consider. He doesn't want to compete for our allegiance. Earlier on in Matthew, he said his famous line, "You cannot serve both God and money. You will love one and hate the other." Meaning that if you have two competing gods, the decisions you make will preference one over the other. And you will preference the things or the person you are most excited about. Right? That's what we do. So look at your calendar, look at your spending, look at your dreams, look at your goals. They will point you to where your allegiances really lie. And you know, when we make enough choices in our lives, the little ones, that put other things or other people or ourselves over Jesus, and we do it over and over and over and over again, we will find over time that he truly does begin to matter less and less to us. Until one day you find yourself in a place where you go, don't really care anymore. Which he's not happy with. Notice in this interaction, Jesus is making the demand. He wants more from you. But it's because he wants more for you. Right? Here's the last thing for us to remember. This passage comes between two sections where Jesus showed us something of who he is. In last week's passage, we saw that he had come to make people clean, spiritually clean, so that we could be restored into the presence of God, which is what, as a person, you were made for. This is where you function best, is if you are united to Christ and worshiping the Lord. This is where you do best. It's a state where we operate as fully human. Next week we'll see how he came to show us that the place he's leading us to, the kingdom he's creating, is one of order and beauty and restoration. It's a good place. This is what Jesus wants for you. And he knows that the good things here, and they are good things, remember, work, relationships, exercise, sport, they are gifts from God that we can rejoice in. He knows that good things so quickly become God things. You know, we cease rejoicing in them and we start revolving around them. So Jesus is not just saying to you, "Oi, focus on me." He's saying, look at me, look at what I want for you, look at what I've got planned, it's better. Don't look there, look here. It's why he uses the language there of let the dead bury their own dead. The things that might compete for your allegiance here are like that man's dead father. They're gone. They belong to this life. And he's saying, focus on that which belongs to eternity. And on top of that, he says, look how much I'm willing to give to make that happen for you. Remember the Son of Man, no place to lay his head? In calling you and I to deny ourselves the comforts of the world, Jesus is not asking us anything he hasn't done either. He made himself nothing. Remember, God the Son squished into a human body to come and die a slave's death on a cross, which he did for you. Yes, following Jesus can be costly, but rescuing you was costly to him. It was the price he paid because he was completely devoted to the will of the Father, and because God, the Father, Son, and Spirit, love you. Saving grace is free. It cost him everything. And discipleship can be costly. You know, at a wedding celebration, the husband and wife will make vows. Those vows include committing to single-minded allegiance to the other person. I will love you above all others. And on the cross, Jesus was showing us his bride, the church is called his bride. He was showing us his commitment to his promise that he will love us above all others. So when he calls you to single-minded allegiance, he's not asking you something that he is not giving you. He's saying, love me as I've loved you. He's not asking you something that he is or not ready or given to you. And he showed you that on the cross. So before we take communion today, which is not just a reminder of what Jesus did, but it's a symbol of your union with him. It's a little bit like the wedding ring. It's a symbol that he is yours and you are his. Imagine what wholehearted allegiance to Jesus might look like. I think we're sometimes afraid of that because it sounds radical. It sounds a little bit sort of over the top, but what do you think our homes and our workplaces and our city would look like if we were radically devoted to Jesus? If we did treat others kindly and gently, if we did exercise self-control, if places, our homes, our church, where we were places of forgiveness and restoration of relationship, if they were a place where mistakes aren't held against other people, but we have space to grow and learn, they'd be places of goodness and love and joy, which is what he wants for you and me, which is what he wants to show the world. That is his expectation for us. That is the outcome he is shepherding you and me towards. It's good, it's healthy, it's better. So walk with Jesus, friends. Today, as you listen to this, walk with him more closely and devote yourselves to him as he has to you.